What's up, guys? It's the HPR Chronicles as I fix my mic with Shakur and Smith. It's a podcast about politics, history, and race from history, politics, and race, the HPR.
HPR.
From a pop culture's perspective. We're going to try to break it down simple and plain so that you guys can understand it. It's the same spiel every week. I like to remind the new listeners.
Yes.
I'm a filmmaker from Trinidad and Tobago, so I've traveled a lot, and I've always loved history. Chris is a veteran of the Army Reserve that works for the VA currently and has a passion for history and politics. We always get into big political debates and stuff when we out sipping wine and hanging out and stuff like that.
Why does alcohol do that?
I don't know. But I always like to say, man, that it's about truth. We're not pro any race, even though we're of African descent, or what's the true name of Africa? Albaculan or something like that. Even though we're Alkabulanites, as they say, this is not about the black race or any race. It's really about truth. There's one history. It's everybody's history. And we're not pro anything. We're just pro truth, you know. And if the truth offends you, we're sorry, not sorry, as we always say. Last week we covered the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yes.
You know, and the history of all that and what that was all about. That was interesting. And this week, I think Chris is going to kick it off about Jim Crow, which is something I've always been interested in, that I've always known about, but I don't know much about the history of it at all. So as Crispy explains for our viewers on YouTube, you might see me taking notes and stuff because that's my way of like not forgetting my questions if I don't want to interrupt Chris. And all the listeners on iTunes and Spotify and Google Play and all that, you guys don't even see all that. You kind of just hear us and it kind of flows for you guys, but that's just for our viewers that like to watch. So yeah, man, Crispy's going to take it away and we're going to find out what this Jim Crow is all about for you guys.
So, most of you have probably heard the term Jim Crow. Either you thought it was a person, but
yeah, I've definitely heard it.
So the question is kind of like, is it a person or not, you know?
Yeah, is it a person? I've always thought it was a person.
Yeah, Jim Crow is a real person, but the person's name is Thomas Dartmouth Rice.
Oh.
A white man who was born in New York City in 1808. He worked in theater, and in his 20s, he had an act where he would paint his face black and perform a song and a dance that he claimed was inspired by a slave.
Huh.
So, you know,
yeah,
jumping around.
The old Sambo thing, or whatever they call it.
Whatever you want to. So, the act was called Jump Jim Crow or Jumping Jim Crow.
Oh.
So then he would put on blackface. Then he would also put on some shabby clothes that he thought Southern black slave people wore. Interesting enough, his act was a hit in New York City, up north, with working class whites. And he would tour, and he went even as far as England. So his, his act would influence and get people thinking. So overall, the act helped to popularize Jim Crow as a derogatory term for African Americans. It was a way to reduce people of color to the kind of caricature that Rice performed on stage.
Oh,
so what I also find interesting is how this kind of goes in almost in line with some of the other episodes, like the N-word and stuff like that. And one of the things I brought up was how, you know, the characters of the, either smart guy or not smart. It was usually a muscular or a slow-witted dumb person, which is probably what he did with this, act. But anyway, Jim. So then, because of how people perceived blacks because of his performance, Jim Crow laws kind of started. And so what are Jim Crow laws? Well, Jim Crow laws are a collection, so state and locals, let me just redo this. Jim Crow laws are a collection of state and local statutes that legalize racial segregation, which lasted for 100 years.
Wow.
So
the play he did was called the Jim Crow.
Jumping Jim Crow. Jump Jim Crow or Jumping Jim Crow.
Interesting.
And I think the jumping was just part of the dance.
Yeah.
And like I said, it lasted for 100 years. So I want to just kind of reiterate slavery lasted 400 years. And then now you have Jim Crow and the laws that, people, that states and the local areas enacted, and that lasted for another 100 years. So you're talking about 500 years where black people are oppressed.
Wow.
You know? So even though the 13th Amendment, which freed 4 million slaves, white people wanted to keep blacks poor and under control. So then we'll call these, black codes. Black codes were strict laws detailing when, where, and how free slaves could work and for how much compensation.
Wow.
These codes used in the South were a legal way to put black citizens into indentured servitude. By take away voting rights, to control where they lived and how they traveled, and to seize children for labor purposes. So basically, they could put kids to work because there was no laws against that. The legal system was set up to oppress black citizens because ex-Confederate soldiers working as police and judges made it difficult for African Americans to win court cases. So it's kind of crazy to think that when the South lost, they were the military or the soldiers were able to still have positions of power and were allowed to then still enact whatever they wanted onto regular citizens, even though they lost, and they really should have been considered treasonous and treated in such a way.
Right, and the stuff they were doing should have been against the law. Actually,
should have been against the law
because slavery was abolished.
The codes worked in conjunction with labor camps for the incarcerated, where prisoners were treated as slaves. Black offenders typically received longer sentences than their white equals, and because of the grueling work,
just like today,
I was going to say, just like today, and because of the grueling work that they were forced to do, many didn't live out their entire sentences. So some just died because of the fact that they were, in these chain gangs, working, probably, yeah.
So that's where the Jim Crow laws came from, derived.
So it's kind of like Jim Crow, the actor, not actor, but the character Jim Crow that this guy portrayed, eventually became a way to overall just keep blacks oppressed. Right. So
and out of that they created the Jim Crow law.
So the laws would be different things that kept them oppressed. So like I said, where they could live. So you couldn't live in an area where there's other white people. You had to find your own home. And then how they traveled, which I don't know if people are familiar, or you're familiar with the Green Book.
Yeah. So saw the movie.
Where you can So the Green Book, in case you're not familiar, is a book that was created to help blacks travel down south, so that they knew where they could, what hotels to stay at, what restaurants, and all that stuff, what to go to without being harassed or potentially killed,
or arrested or potentially killed. Yeah.
So after for around 15 years after the Civil War, so after the Civil War ended, and for 15 years. The Democratic Party at the time used all its power to stop any efforts to help freed slaves from moving forward and prosper. So a lot of people may or may not know this. I think a lot of people do, but then they misconstrue it in different ways, because obviously Abraham Lincoln, who to free the slaves, but also wanted to send them back to Africa too. Was part of the Republican Party. And the Democratic Party at the time was more racial and wanted to keep blacks suppressed, which is way different than how things are. And we can, maybe that's something we should cover, how the parties switched and why and what, so that people can understand that. So anyway, violence was on the rise, making danger a part of black people's lives, like it is today. Black schools were vandalized and destroyed, and bands of violent whites would attack black citizens in the night. There were times gruesome incidents where the victims were tortured and mutilated before being murdered. Throughout the South, families were attacked and forced off their land, as this was when the Ku Klux Klan kind of started to rise up and stuff like that.
So I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Now, so these Jim Crow laws, were they like unspoken thing just amongst white society that the police and government, everyone would just knowingly perpetuate?
So it's more,
or was it like a written thing, like a known law that everyone knew, the blacks and the whites, and it was in the books in the state? Do you know?
and that's okay. So yes, some stuff is in the book, some stuff is more just like
a known thing to do.
Yeah. So if you were traveling down south and you needed to know where to be, so some Jim Crow laws that I recall are, how does it put? Like walking at a particular time of night would be illegal for a black person.
Right.
Or trying to move into a particular area was illegal. Right. And so they would make what you thought was legal, what was maybe legal for a white person was not legal for a black person. And they would create, so there's parts I have written that kind of hit the different laws and stuff like that. And I don't have the specific laws because it varied from state to state, local city to city. Some places were maybe decent, other places were worse.
Yeah.
So at the start of the 1880s, big cities in the South were not strictly following all Jim Crow laws.
Okay.
And black Americans found some leeway. So then, due to the possibilities in these big cities, blacks started moving to the cities in large numbers. This scared white people, so they demanded more laws to limit opportunities for blacks. So some of the laws that would have, and this is what you're asking, public parks in certain places were forbidden for blacks to enter. Like you couldn't even go. Theaters, restaurants were segregated. So the biggest thing at that time was, you've probably heard the term separate but equal. So like you couldn't go to a white theater, but you could go to one that might be owned by a black group. Or if you're taking a train, there was certain cars that were meant for blacks and other ones for whites. And now you would think that certain cars, the black cars were really terrible and run down, but they actually weren't. And that's one, decent thing out of it is that it was separate but equal, so it had to be up to the same standards. So, but
that's crazy, man.
I know. Laws were put in place to forbid blacks from living in white neighborhoods, and segregation was enforced at public pools, phone booths, hospitals, asylums, jails, and residential homes for the elderly and handicapped. Some states required separate textbooks for black and white students. New Orleans mandated the segregation of prostitution according to race.
Wow.
In Atlanta, African Americans in court were given a different Bible from whites to swear on.
Wow.
Marriage,
it's all a part of Jim Crow.
All part of Jim Crow.
Wow.
So basically, Jim Crow was you were just treated differently, either worse or you had to do your own thing. Like I sometimes mention the story how my mother, she went down south and she got out the car and go from Chicago to somewhere in Mississippi, gets out, goes running to the bathroom. My uncle grabs her and is like, "Where do you think you're going?"
Right.
You gotta look at the sign.
Oh, okay.
You gotta go around the back where it says colors only.
Wow.
So, and my mother's 20 years older than me, so that's how close and how long that stuff continued.
Right.
So that separate but equal colors here, white people here, that's Jim Crow. And and the more detail to it is that they did stuff to prevent us from either just living out our lives. Marriage and cohabitation between whites and blacks was strictly forbidden in most southern states. It was not uncommon to see signs posted at the city limits warning blacks they were not welcome at all. So that's that's how I kind of wanted to cover the Jim Crow, give out the information. Now, at another point, I want to talk about the new Jim Crow that we, feel like we're in now. But yeah, that's pretty much. It was a way to Jim Crow laws was a way to almost put blacks back into slavery in some aspect, but it also just prevented. Even though some people were successful, because I'd have to look up the name, but there was a gentleman who, I didn't write that down, who created his own town and found a empty plot. Just can't remember the state, and then had other blacks come in there, and then they built a fairly successful in Alabama. Maybe it's Alabama, and it was 100% black. It's still around right now, and it's still majority black.
In this particular town.
Yeah. So that's one of which would be interesting to see and visit, because I got to imagine that. Excuse me, they have a lot of historical things to talk about there. But
the interesting thing about Jim Crow is like when we were brought here as slaves. It seems, well, not seems, but it's a fact that when they abolished slavery, they just didn't want to accept it and treat us normal, like real citizens.
Well, they
just continued and perpetuated this kind of system of like passive slavery is what I would call it.
That's a good way to say it.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because in their mind, we weren't supposed to be anyway. I'm sure if they would have rather sent us all back to Africa, they would.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Even though this wasn't their country in the first place, all the indigenous people probably wish they would take their ass back to Europe.
Yeah.
You know what I'm trying to say?
And I'm sure the indigenous people would have said, they go back. Y'all probably could stay.
Yeah. You know what I mean? And it's funny. I was looking at Iyanla Vanzant the other day on The Breakfast Club, and she was talking about the history of our people and how she was talking about how we were always a kind, forgiving people, which makes sense why we never went and tried, and we talked about this before, which makes sense why we never went and tried to colonize the entire world and stuff like that. The Egyptians even came here way before the Europeans and didn't do anything or kill anybody or try to take in, you know what I mean? Yeah. And she was breaking it down. You guys should check that episode out. But that's something I've always known, just studying history, even before we started the podcast, that we were just a different type of people at heart, who we are. So we were never savage like that to just go and commit genocide and rape an entire nation and, you know what I mean? Take all the reasons. That's just never who we were. I mean, it just wasn't in our nature. I mean, the same way, and a good, a good analogy is to use dogs. The same way it's in, a child's nature to do certain things that a Rottweiler wouldn't do, or a Pit Bull wouldn't do, or a kind of Corso that I had wouldn't do. Is the same nature how you could have races of people that's just not in their nature to do certain things. So, and my whole point is, people always try to say, well, how can you say that? No, that's not true. Some people are different by nature, culturally and you know what I mean? Spiritually and everything. And every historian you talk to or come across, like I said, I just checked her out on the Breakfast Club the other day. She was talking about how we were kind people and a different people, and I forgot what she was talking about, but it was interesting. She was talking about, I think, slavery and reparations and war and all this stuff, based on what was going on now. And it's funny because when I lived in Culver City, I lived in Culver City so for those who don't know, for our listeners, like, around the world and across the country and stuff, Culver City is a little city. It's about 2 miles north of LAX in LA. And I lived there for probably 20-something years. And Culver City is known all around Southern California to be that city that if you're black and brown, to don't ride through Culver City.
Really?
Yes. Because they will mess with you.
Oh, okay.
It's known. If you could avoid going through Culver City, avoid it.
Wow.
If you ain't got your registration, or if you got mufflers on your car, or if you just look funny, don't go through Culver City, because they will stop you. And it's funny, it actually took me like a couple of years for them to get used to me and know who I was. They literally knew me. They knew that, oh, that was Imani, that film director. He lives here.
Okay.
So they never bothered me. But yeah, it's known. I mean, I literally can call some friends right now and I can put them on speaker and they'll say, "Oh yeah, bro, we don't roll through Culver." And it just trips me out.
Wow.
Even though it's no law that says if you're black and brown and you roll through Culver City, stop them, harass them, make them afraid of our city. It's a known thing.
Got it.
You know what I mean? Well, going back to your whole Jim Crow thing, like this is a known thing. And you will see them stopping folks if you roll through Culver City.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, there's places like that back in Illinois too.
See, that's what I'm saying.
So when you asked me about the laws, so some of the laws that it was like in Birmingham, Alabama, it shall be unlawful for a Negro and white person to play together or in company with each other in any game of cards or dice, dominoes, or checkers.
Wow.
So it's that specific. You know what I'm saying? It shall be unlawful for any white prisoner to be handcuffed or otherwise chained or tied to a Negro prisoner.
Wow.
And that was Arkansas, 1903.
Stuff.
Atlanta, Georgia, in 1926. No colored barber shall serve as a barber to white women or girls. Nebraska, 1911. Marriages are void when one party is a white person and the other person is possessed of 1/8 or more Negro, Japanese, or Chinese blood.
Wow.
So that one's interesting because I've never known that they did it towards Asians and stuff.
Right.
So in Mississippi, 1920, any person presenting for public acceptance or general information, arguments or suggestions in favor of social equality or of intermarriage between whites and Negroes shall be guilty of a misdemeanor and subject to a fine not exceeding $500 or imprisonment not exceeding 6 months, or both fine and imprisonment in the discretion of the court. And at that time, $500 would have been a lot of money.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Separate free schools shall be established for the education of children of African descent, and it shall be unlawful for any colored child to attend any white school or any white child to attend a colored school. Missouri, 1929.
Wow.
Any white woman who shall suffer or permit herself to be got with child by a Negro or mulatto shall be sentenced to the penitentiary for not less than 18 months.
Wow.
And that's
and
Maryland.
Now all these white women love brothers.
Maryland,
but
1924.
back then they would get it put in jail for dating a brother. Or for having a kid with one.
Which is also why if a white woman were to have come talk to you and then got caught by someone else, she would possibly turn around and be like, oh he was doing whatever. So then you might end up just being lynched.
Right.
So,
wow.
You know, I mean, I've heard of those.
Oh, of course, yeah.
You know, like so then all railroads. That was another one that was kind of pretty big, is the railroads and stuff. So all railroads carrying passengers in the state other than street railroads shall provide equal but separate accommodations for the white and colored races, by providing 2 or more passenger cars for each passenger train, or by dividing the cars by a partition so as to secure separate accommodations. So either you were in a separate car, or if the car, you only had 1 or 2 cars and you had to put people, you had to put some type of partition. Divide. So
crazy.
The corporate commission is hereby vested with power to require telephone companies in the state of Oklahoma to maintain separate booths for white and colored patrons when there is a demand for such separate booths.
And you want to know what trips me out about this? And we'll close out soon or whatever. But we'll do a podcast about this. But these are the same people that before slavery, before the 1400s back in Europe, was taught by us how to use the bathroom and they would literally throw feces out the window on the sidewalk and stuff like that. and we showed them the toilet, how to use the toilet. Same people. That's what trips me out. So then after slavery, they want to put borders up, make it seem like we the messed
bad
up
ones. Yeah.
They flipped the whole thing around.
You know,
I'm laughing about it. It's just crazy, man. It's just crazy.
And there was something that just went out of my mind. So how did you start that statement? You said you was like the same. Anyway, it'll come to me.
Oh, you had something you want to add to it?
Yeah, I can't remember now. But yeah, just overall is, obviously we know people may remember buses, sit at the bus,
sit at the back
of the bus, or the counter at the diners and stuff like that. Either had, whites only, and then anyone who tried to protest and change were beaten a lot of times.
Right.
So yeah, that's Jim Crow.
That's interesting, man. Wow.
And I'm sure there's a lot more.
Some more. Yeah. No, but that was good. That was a good covering of it, though. To just know what it was about. And I didn't even know it came from a play. None of that stuff. I thought it was a man's name. I always wondered what it was. Jim Crow.
I mean, I knew Jim, but I wasn't sure that Jim Crow and blackface was so close to each other. And I wasn't sure that. Yeah, I didn't. The beginning stuff that I read and looked up, that was very interesting to know, and to know that it was up in New York. Where you thought being up in the North was going to be better, but really it wasn't. America was not good at all to blacks, and it didn't really matter. You just had there's one thing I do kind of want to talk about is I don't know if you've ever been, I had a discussion with someone, and someone goes, "Which is a better place to be, up north or down south?" Down south, they straight up going to look you in the face and call you a nigger, right?
Right.
Up north, they're going to look and smile.
But still call you.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's going to be behind your back. You know what I'm saying?
That's a good point.
So down south, you knew how things were. Like, you knew you had to be on your P's and Q's. Up north, you could possibly, misstep yourself because you thought everything was going to be
it was just hidden.
Good. Oh, I know what I was going to say is you had mentioned you said these same people that are doing stuff. I would like to also more and more keep saying this, like at our ages, being in our 40s, we are now at the age where we need to start going, being more political, trying to seek office, getting more representation of our own people, which will allow us to make changes. The people that are, a lot of the people that are in office and have been in office, they grew up pre-civil rights. So as much as they talk about how, and they may have helped a law or two, but they still have that mentality.
Yeah,
they still have that thought that blacks were inferior.
Yep, I know,
so
you're right.
Now it's our turn to turn the table.
Right.
And then I'm not saying like we turn the table and we oppress others. It's just, it's time to get the equal control that we want to take. Help shape the United States into the United States for all of us, as opposed to just some of us.
Right, and real quick too, I was watching something before we close. I was watching something with Killer Mike, and they were talking about, and Charlemagne the God, and they were talking about, we keep talking about reparations, but we don't even know what we want. And I don't want to do a whole nother episode about reparations, but I just think it's good to bring up now this whole Jim Crow thing. Because they need to do reparations, but even before that, us as a people need to get together and talk about what we want.
Correct.
Because they'll just give us anything. We need to, because we kind of came up with our own thing about what we thought we should be given. And we need to come together as a people and talk about what we want. Because HR 40 or whatever they're doing in Congress right now to start exploring the reparations. It's something that needs to be had. What were you going to say?
I'm sorry, but I would just want to reiterate what you actually said was that if we don't ask come together, figure out what it is we want, and they give us whatever. Like you said, we're going to complain that we didn't get what we wanted. When if we don't know what we want and need, then how can we ask for it? So we gotta.
So what are we waiting for them just to tell us?
Yeah.
Hey, this is what you're gonna get.
And
see, we're actually starting off wrong right there.
Exactly. We should as
people get together, form committees.
Say, this is what we want, and this is what we feel would be the best way to. Instead of again getting something from the man to appease us and make us feel happy when we should be making our own. Even if the elected officials
come up with it and say, all right, guys, vote on these 5 options and do like a statewide thing. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And we talk about the options and get those down, and then we can pick. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So I just wanted to add that in while we're talking about Jim Crow. You know what I mean? So that's it. Anything else you want to add?
Nope. I think that was good.
All right, cool. All right, guys, that's our episode this week. That was a good one. Thanks, Chris, for bringing in the Jim Crow. That was really cool. It's HPR Chronicles with Shakur and Smith. Don't forget to follow us on social media. rptalktruth@gmail.com if you want to email us anything, if you want to throw us some topics you'd like us to cover. Just want to thank all of our listeners on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, Buzzsprout, Stitcher, all the cell phone podcast apps, and those who watch us on YouTube. Thank you. Don't forget to subscribe so you can keep getting all this good information on history, politics, and race. And we'll see you next time. Peace out.
Sorry, not sorry.
Peace. Sorry, not sorry. Yeah. Peace.